Welcome to the Retire with Peace podcast, the podcast where we help you create a fulfilling and stress-free retirement. Each week, we bring you expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you plan and live your best retirement life. Whether you're nearing retirement or already enjoying your golden years, this podcast is here to support you every step of the way. Let's embark on this journey together and discover how to retire with peace.
Welcome back to the Retire with Peace podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dave Zegel. This episode is sponsored by CWOs for Hire, which is the retirement and tax planning firm that I co-own. This time of year is actually when we bring on a lot of new clients because we're done with the crazy meeting and tax portion of the year, and now we're getting more into planning, so we have some space to bring people on. So if you are wanting help with your retirement planning, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk. I've been hearing, well, really a couple times. I wouldn't say a lot, but I've heard a few times recently where there's been a debate about what percentage of bonds should my retirement portfolio be. Historically, a lot of people have pointed to this 60-40 allocation, where you have 60% stocks and 40% bonds. And they'll say if you have that structure, you're well set up for retirement because you have 40% in bonds. It's going to provide some more stability for the income you need, and the other 60% in stocks for growth over the long term. And that's not a bad thing. And that's historically been kind of the benchmark or the rule of thumb, if you want to say that, around what that stock and bond allocation should be. Recently, I've seen this a couple of times where somebody's come along and said, well, really the allocation should be 70-30, with 70% stocks, 30% bonds, because we do need more growth over the long term. Okay. So there's now this debate between 60-40 and 70-30, but somebody else might come along and say, nah, that's all too aggressive. It should just be 50-50, 50% stocks, 50% bonds. So we have this debate going around what the percentage structure should be for an optimal retirement portfolio. And I don't think any of that's necessarily a bad thing, and I'm not here to bash any of those percentages. What I would encourage is a little different view. We've talked about this quite a bit on this podcast, where we want to make sure we set aside at least 5 years worth of income in individual bonds. A lot of times when people are talking about these different structures, they're talking about stock funds and bond funds. We've had other podcast episodes where we talk about the difference between bond funds and using individual bonds. But one of the basic premises is that if you're using individual bonds, you can structure it to where the bond ends, it matures on certain dates to match up with when you need the income. Therefore, as we're setting aside 5 years of income, we can have bonds that mature in each of those 5 years to give us the income that we need. And then the rest we can set aside in stocks for longer term growth. So it's not so much about the percentage that we are using, it's about identifying the dollar amount that we want. What is that annual income? What's our monthly income? And what does that mean on a yearly basis? And that determines what we need to set aside in bonds, not a more theoretical percentage. It's identifying the income that we need for the next 5 years and setting that aside in individual bonds that will mature over that 5-year period and give you that income. I can't say guaranteed, but we use high quality bonds. That way it's almost certainly guaranteed that that bond will pay you back what you need for your income over those 5 years. Now, how does that fit into the percentages? Well, we found, not surprisingly, that when we're working with our clients, the amount of bonds winds up somewhere in that range between 40% and 30%. Not a big surprise. That's why people are talking about these percentages. But the exact percentage doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if it's 30, 35, 40, 33, 37. That's not what's important. What's important is that we have lined up the income needed to the specific amount of individual bonds that we have to provide that income. So we're not dealing with a theoretical percentage, which can work. Like I said, I'm not being negative on the 60-40 versus 70-30 debate. But instead, I just encourage us to line up the income with the individual bonds that will mature to guarantee, or very close to guarantee, that we have that income coming in. And then whatever the rest is, we can focus it on growth. There are some clients who, just because of their retirement planning, maybe their bond percentage gets closer to 50%. That can be the case, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we found that most wind up fitting in between that 30% and 40% bonds, and then the rest going to stocks. And that works out quite well. So to wrap it all up, again, I'm not bashing the 60-40 versus 70-30. That can all work fine. I just encourage everybody to line up their income for the next 5 years with individual bonds that will mature over those 5 years to provide that income, and then focus the rest on stock investments that will grow rather than worrying about exact percentages. It's just a much easier way in dollar terms to line up your income and make sure that is locked in for your specific plan.